Hey, what's up guys, it's Bakes, and thank you for joining me for another episode of my random album reviews. Yes, it has been a little while since my last episode in this series, but just to remind you guys, if you don't know, I actually said this in my last episode in the series, that this was going to be a series I was going to do less often than what I had in the past. I used to do an episode once every month, but it got to a point where I was just getting too burnt out and finding less enjoyment with the albums because I was just flipping through them so quickly, one every month, and it was just sort of, taking a toll on me. So now I'm just doing it whenever I feel like it. But getting today's album, if you don't know, I have a random number generator. Whatever number I pull out, I pull that off my shelf. And today's album, super excited that I got this one. It's one of my favourite, I guess you could say, modern albums. It's from the year 2018 by the Australian band Trophy Eyes, and it's titled The American Dream. Now, as usual with my random album reviews, I'll quickly run through the history of myself in this album, go through my thoughts of it as a whole, break down a few of the tracks, and then finish with a rating out of 10. So, as I said, super excited to get into this one today, so let's get into my thoughts of the band Trophy Eyes and their album, The American Dream. So as I mentioned before, starting off with a little bit of history between myself and this album, and I guess with myself and the band Trophy Eyes. I first came across Trophy Eyes with their previous album titled Chemical Miracle, and that's where I fell in love with the band and fell in love with that album. It's still one of my favourite albums to this day. And then I had to go back and check out their previous album before that one titled Mend and Move On, which was also the band's debut album. And even though that album has its moments, overall I've never really connected with it. It's actually the only Trophy Eyes album I've never picked up and honestly don't intend on ever picking up. But nevertheless, comparing Mend and Move On with Chemical Miracle, I could see the direction the band wanted to go in, and I could see the progression that they had between the two albums, and that just made me really excited for whatever they were going to do in their future. And as I said, the first album to follow Chemical Miracle was The American Dream. So when this album was announced, I was super excited. It would have had to be in the top 3 most hyped I've ever been for an album coming out. I remember I was anticipating this album like crazy, counting down every single day till its release. A trailer came out for this album. Normally albums don't have trailers, but this one had one, just made me super hyped. The leading single for this album was You Can Count on Me, which is still a fan favourite song till this day. And it's clear to see why. It's super catchy, super infectious, just packs a lot of energy. One of my favourite songs, and as I said, still a fan favourite. And the band even announced a meet and greet at a place that was very local to me, and I had to go, and I'll show you, get my American Dream Tour poster signed by them. I got all 5 members of the band to sign it. This is when they had 5 members on their roster. They currently have 4. It was my first ever time meeting a band in person, and I'll also insert pictures in this video as well. But as I said, the first time I ever met a band in person, I was super nervous, and for the life of me, I can't fucking remember what I said to them. I think I just mumbled that I loved Chemical Miracle and I was super excited for this album, and they were really nice, and as I said, signed my poster, and now I've got it framed and it hangs on my wall. It's one of my favourite pieces that I have, and I treasure it, and I treasure that memory, even though, as I said, I probably dropped the ball and fucked up because of how nervous I was, but they were super nice, and I think all of us there actually got to pick up the album off the top of my head. I think it was like a week early, so that was also super cool, but as I said, one of my favourite items that I have, and I'd really treasure it. But yes, moving on, as I said, I was super excited for this album to come out, and honestly, looking back, my initial thoughts on this album overall haven't changed too much over time, so let's get into my thoughts of Trophy Eyes' album, The American Dream. Now, as I move on to my thoughts for this album, I've always felt that this album puts in an effort to, I guess, kind of make the songs a little bit more digestible than what they've been in the past with previous efforts and albums. And honestly, it's neither in a direction that I'm too for nor against. I honestly don't really mind. I guess I kind of have a bias for earlier Trophy Eyes and their kind of rough around the edges approach. But even though this album is a little bit more polished and clean, I still think this album's really solid and it's a pretty strong effort. But what I mean is they don't completely abandon their quote-unquote rough around the edges vibe that I feel like is kind of signature to the band and make them who they are and kind of make them Trophy Eyes. It still comes through in moments like the song I mentioned earlier, You Can Count on Me, Miming in the Choir, I Can Feel It Calling. There's plenty of other songs where it comes through, but overall, as I said, I feel like there's a more clean and polished approach, whether it's with the instrumentals, but also with John's vocals that seem a little bit more tamed and a little bit less raspy, but as I said, still comes through in pockets, but overall a bit more polished approach. And quickly, while I'm on the topic of vocalist John Florini, I love John as a vocalist, and I think he's insanely underrated, and he's really talented as a musician. He's got to be one of my favourite vocalists working at the moment. And I've always loved his writing and lyrics in previous albums. However, with this album, I do feel like there is more of an effort to push storytelling to the forefront and not let it get swept under by other elements like instrumentals, for example. And I think that's another reason why we might hear less of John's sort of what I think is his signature sound, which is kind of rough, almost straining, raspy kind of vocals on this album. And don't get me wrong, like I mentioned before, it still comes through in moments like songs like You Can Count on Me, Miming in the Choir, I Feel It Calling, even the second verse of a song like More Like You. It's still there in parts, but I do feel like it's less prominent than other albums in the past, and it does take a step back. And now I do stand by what I said earlier, saying that overall this album still is a really solid effort, and it's really enjoyable, well at least for myself it is. I do feel like with possibly trying to, as I also said earlier, polish this album up a little bit and make it a bit more digestible than what their albums had been in the past, I do feel like it starts to fall into some patterns that are noticeable. And by all means, I'm not saying that these are negatives or they hurt the album in any major way. I just feel like when you listen to this album from start to finish, and especially as many times as I have, you do start to see some things rise to the surface that are noticeable and make you think, okay, I'm starting to see some patterns here. And the first one that I do want to bring up, and I've noticed it from the very first time I listened to this album, there are a lot of moments in songs on this album that are sing-along, repeated chanting, anthem-like moments, sort of choirs in the back, or as I said, repeated, lyrics over and over, chanting sort of thing in so many of these songs. So much so I had to quickly go back and skim through the track list and find as many songs as I could that had this, and I counted 7 out of a track list of 12 songs, so that's over half. With this, as I said, sing-along, repeated chanting, anthem-like moments, sometimes choirs. And as I said, 7 out of 12, that was just skimming back, so it could have been more. But as I said, I've noticed it from the very first time listening to this album. I was like, damn, there's like so many moments like that through the album. And as I said, I feel like for at least over half of them it works in their favour, but it is a pattern that does occur a lot on this album. Another pattern is songs that instrumentals sort of being a bit more tame, and as I said, it's something I brought up earlier. I do feel like the instrumentals in some of the songs are a bit more stripped back than what they have been in the past, just to bring John's storytelling and lyrics to the forefront a little bit more. But again, that is a pattern that I do notice on this album when comparing it to their previous work. So moving on to my thoughts of the track listing now, and where I want to start with the track listing is how well it flows and works together from tracks 1 to 12. And what I think really helps with the album's flow is the fact that, in my opinion, I don't think there are any bad songs on this album. By all means, just like any effort, there are going to be songs that you like more than others, and some songs that you can't help but skip every now and then, but so be it. For me to say that there are any songs that I hate or I think are completely unlistenable on this album, that's just too big of a stretch. So as I said, really helps the flow of the track list when, at least in my opinion, there are no bad songs. But opening up this album is the song that has grown on me the most over time, being Autumn. I used to think that Autumn was just okay. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it was just sort of middle of the run for me. But as I said, grown on me the most over time. I really love the lyrics now. An overall positive and energetic vibe, especially through the choruses. I find the choruses to be extremely catchy. As I said, the song that has grown on me the most over time. But then we get to track 2, which is a fan popular song, and it's just growing in fan popularity more and more over time. And it's definitely deserving of it. The track is something bigger than this. It's insanely epic, extremely catchy, but it's also got a really relatable message that everyone can digest and understand. You know, it's a song about life and death, something that we're all going to go through. And it's a song that could have potentially opened the album and also closed it, but of course I don't mind having it at track number 2. And then that follows with 2 songs in a row being Friday Forever and More Like You. Friday Forever being this upbeat sort of dance-like song with lots of energy, and then More Like You sort of being trophyized version of a Disney song. If you don't believe me, go and listen to this track and try not to picture Brother Bear in your head or something like that, because it just feels like Trophy Eye's version of a Disney song. With track number 5, the album takes a breath with its first acoustic song being A Cotton Candy Sky. In its runtime of just short of 2 minutes, it really tells a calming story with sort of a melancholic feel in a way. With an extremely visual and mood-setting lyrics, you can really have a picture painted in your head with the way John describes the lyrics and tells the story in this song. But just as fast as it slows down, it picks up again with the following track, which was the leading single for the album, You Can Count on Me, which is clear to see why, as I said earlier, is a fan favourite. It's got an overly infectious chorus, and the energy packed in it from start to finish is just crazy amounts, and it's a super fun song, and as I said, easily a fan favourite for the album. Track 7, Tiptoe, and track 8, Broken, is where the album shows its weakest hand in my opinion. As I said before, I don't think there are any bad songs, but if I have to pick out the album's lowest point, it's these two songs back to back. Tiptoe has grown on me lyrically in particular, but both Tiptoe and Broken sort of have an overall kind of safe feel about them. But that low doesn't stay around for long when it goes to track 9, Lavender Bay. Very similar to You Can Count on Me. I also think Lavender Bay was a single as well, obviously just not the leading one. But as I said, very similar to You Can Count on Me. Insanely infectious chorus, making it one of the catchier songs on the album. And then it's followed by a really gritty, moody song being Miming in the Choir. It carries this attitude about it, which I can't quite put my finger on, but by all means works in its favour. As I said, has this attitude, really moody, really gritty, packs a punch, is track 10, Miming in the Choir. To close the track list for the album, we have the second to last song, A Symphony of Crickets, which is actually very similar to a song like A Cotton Candy Sky, as in they're both stripped back acoustic and have very short runtimes. I believe off the top of my head, A Symphony of Crickets has the shorter runtime of the two, but don't take my word for it. As I said, that's just off the top of my head. But if I am comparing the two songs, I don't think it's done as well as A Cotton Candy Sky. But with its very short runtime, it saves room for the closing track, I Can Feel It Calling, which is a smash hit, super epic song to close off the album. It's the longest runtime out of any of the songs on the album, and it's an epic to close off the album, which you guys know I love. And it's a message in its lyrics that I feel like is perfectly suited to close off the album. Very deep, very emotional song, and as I said, just suits the closing of the album. So as I sum up my thoughts for this album and eventually give it a rating out of 10, as I said in my intro, this was one of my most anticipated / hyped albums of all time. I couldn't wait for this thing to come out, and for its to date 5-year lifespan, I can say that it's held up really well. It is an album that I probably listen to more than most. It's one of my favourites in my collection, and I do come back to it quite regularly. It just features a lot of Trophy Eye's sort of signature sound, while also showing evolution and progression and growth in the band. And yes, sometimes the progression comes across as falling into repeating patterns and possibly safer approaches to songs. Overall, it doesn't hurt the album in any major way, and as I said, it's still really enjoyable for myself. So if I'm giving Trophy Eyes The American Dream a rating out of 10, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. As I said, I find this album really enjoyable. I listen to it a lot. I listen to it a lot back to back with Chemical Miracle, as I said, the album that came out before this one. Honestly, it's like pulling strings to see which one is the favourite of Trophy Eyes in my opinion. Both albums are really, really strong, but for a rating out of 10 for The American Dream by Trophy Eyes, as I said, I got to give it an 8.5. So thank you guys for joining me for this random album review of The American Dream by Trophy Eyes. If you've heard this album, let me know your thoughts of it in the comments below. I love Trophy Eyes. They're one of my favourite bands making music at the moment. I recently picked up their newest album, Suicide and Sunshine. If you've heard that one, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm hanging on to my thoughts of it for now. I'll save them for a later date. But if you want to know my thoughts of each individual track and what I rank them from the Tracklist ranking, check out my Tracklist ranking of The American Dream. It should be out at the same time as well. That's just more of an in-depth thought and talk of each individual track and ranking them from my least favourite to favourite. As I said, that video should be up at the same time. And again, guys, I know, as I said earlier, I'm not doing as much music content as I have in the past on my channel. I know a lot of people predominantly come to my channel for horror content, which is fine. But let me know if you do come here for the music content, or maybe this is your first time. Let me know in the comments below. But either way, thank you for joining me for today's episode, and I'll see you guys for another video soon. Peace.